I think of all of the emotions, shame is possibly one of the most difficult, distressing, and painful to have to experience. Most of our emotions are an indication about how we feel about certain circumstances or certain people in our lives, whereas shame is more a narrative of how we feel about ourselves. Now, a certain amount of shame, like any emotions, is healthy. I mean, it gives us an indication of how we are showing up in the world. You know, when we have hurt somebody and we're aware of that, we need to remain accountable. We need to be responsible for our actions and what we say. And consequently, we experience shame. And this is kind of a preventative measure to let us know that we don't want to repeat this behavior or we don't want to hurt people again. Whereas toxic shame is when we are carrying shame that isn't ours to carry, and it's basically either the result of some trauma that we experienced in our past or the consequence of shame that has been passed down through our family of origin. Now, unfortunately, toxic shame becomes a narrative of how we see ourselves. It basically tells us a story of being unlovable, of being worthless, or of being completely repulsive. And it is just so heavy to carry around with you. I mean, shame is something that I embodied for at least 30 years. So I know how painful it can be. And I know how much it can permeate the way in which you experience the world, the way in which you experience your relationships. Because ultimately, if you feel ashamed of yourself at your core, if you feel ashamed of what you look like, if you feel ashamed of who it is that you are as a character, then you project that onto the world. You assume that everybody else sees you the same way that you see yourself, and the world becomes a very painful place to live in as a consequence. Now, the thing with this type of shame is you didn't ask for it, but you are the only one that can bring yourself out the other side. I mean, the most liberating thing I have ever done is release myself of shame that was never mine to carry in the first place. And I think it's Byron Katie that says that nobody can hurt you as much as you can hurt yourself. And when we continue to regurgitate a narrative of shame within ourselves, then life is always going to be distressing. It is always going to be painful. And it's even very intolerable to experience. I mean, when we feel shame from a sensation perspective, from a somatic perspective, it feels really, really icky in the body. And consequently, we often dissociate. We often cut ourselves off from our emotional experiences. But in doing so, we cut ourselves off from joy and from love and from happiness. Because shame is so visceral, because it is so painful to experience, it can also result in us lashing out at other people because it just spills over. It's too much for us to carry. It is this complete rejection of the self, and you're also projecting this rejection onto the people that you possibly love the most. So you're assuming that they're rejecting you too, and that's so, so painful. And of course you're going to feel irritable, of course you're going to feel angry, and of course you're going to take things out on the people that you feel are rejecting you. And again, it's just recognizing that this becomes a vicious cycle, because the more you act like that, the more shame you're going to experience. The good news is that by working with the body, by working with the mind, by working with the emotions, and by working with the spirit, you can move into a place of acceptance. You can discard that shroud of shame that was never yours to carry, and you can show up to your life. You can show up for yourself, and you can show up in your relationships. If you would like to find out more about how you can deal with the shame that you may be carrying, then get in touch with me on the website, fundamentals.ie.